Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for coming out in such numbers on what's a very sad week for South Australia, what's a very sad week for democracy in South Australia. I don't know what to say to this government that just seems to be deaf to the needs and the desires of the people that they're meant to represent in executive government. We've got so many battles with this government, that a government that wants to bring PFAS from around Australia and dump it in McLaren Vale, a wonderful food and wine region that is respected around the world. And then a couple of weeks later, they want to totally disregard the wishes of the people, the businesses and the councils and the growers of our area to deny us from being a GM-free area in South Australia. As a former agriculture minister, I went to the marketplace. I went to Europe, to North America, to China, to Japan, and I saw that what the marketplace wanted increasingly was biodynamic, organic, non-GM food. So if that's what the market wants, and we have a wonderful place here in the world where we have great, clean, green credentials, and where we have legislative protection to stop GM crops being grown here, why would you give that away? So we were one of the few jurisdictions anywhere in the world that was phylloxera free, which is a little grub that eats all the vines and decimated the European and North American grapevines back in the 1800s. Our government back in the 1880s had the foresight to bring in a Phylloxera Act to protect our vines in South Australia from phylloxera. So we've never had it in South Australia, while it's in every other mainland state. We had the foresight to set up biosecurity barriers against fruit fly coming in here. So again, we don't have any fruit fly here. So we have got a 150-year reputation and actually governments of all persuasions up until now standing side by side with our producers and our farmers to make sure that we are one of the cleanest and greenest areas in the world. Now, I reckon I've been running this fight to keep us GM free for about 15 years now, and being very outspoken in our own party room in the parliament. And then I think in the first week or so that I was appointed as the Minister for Agriculture back in 2014, went along to the annual No GM rally out the front, and that outraged Monsanto and Bayer and all the poison peddlers. They couldn't believe that an agriculture minister would be so keen to be there on the side of non-GM, but that's who I've always been. So why would I change my mind when I became the agriculture minister? Now, the Liberals, before they got in at the last election, kept saying, oh, we don't really know about GM, we'll have an inquiry when we get in. But we know that privately, and sometimes someone would break ranks and utter it publicly, that they always wanted GM for South Australia, because they are blind to the premiumisation of our food. They are blind to the fact that people value having clean and green. They are beholden to Monsanto, to Bayer, to the poison peddlers, and to the phony lobby group called Crop, whatever it is, which is actually paid for by the poison peddlers. That's who they're beholden to. So they'd rather listen to multinational chemical companies and act on their behalf than on the people that they represent, the citizens of this state. And so follow the money trail back, and that's where you'll find this decision rests. And I think it's a disgrace. I mean, it didn't strike me as a great surprise that this is what they wanted to do. But again, they kept trying to change the regulation. A couple of times they brought the bill before Parliament, and at the second last time they brought it in, Frank Pangello, who got in on Nick Xenophon's ticket, so no one would have voted for Frank without Nick Xenophon being his captain as they went to that last election. So Frank's in there, and he was wavering. He made this crazy speech against people who didn't want GM introduced into South Australia, and he was wavering. And we knew that we didn't have the numbers in the lower house where I am, so the government would get it through there. And with Frank's vote shifting, the next time they brought this to Parliament, we would have had the GM ban lifted all over the state. So as a Labor Party, we thought, I know that the Flurio doesn't want it. I know that Barossa doesn't want it. I know Adelaide Hills doesn't want it. So I said, we came up with a compromise, and sometimes politics is the art of the compromise. You're better off carving out a part of the state that can remain GM free than being part of the entire state bar Kangaroo Island that then is open to having GM crops. So we thought it was a common sense sort of thing to have councils opt in, which is why we came up with the agreement, the amendment, and the government supported that, and we got it through. And then we saw the councils go off and do the consultation, do the work. We saw the McLaren Vale Great Wine and Tourism Association, who did a magnificent job alongside the Barossa Great Wine and Tourism Association. They really kind of led this on the ground to point out that the economic advantage that they get from remaining GM free is around $25 million a year. That's just for McLaren Vale, which is a much bigger economic win than what Kangaroo Island gets. So the government was prepared to give Kangaroo Island exemption and keep it GM free, but now have turned around with an area that has a much more compelling, bigger economic case to put, and told them, no, we're totally rejecting your application. But what's worse is that the former Minister for Agriculture, who had to quit because of some country allowances that he claimed when perhaps he shouldn't have, when he was at a function about 4 or 5 weeks ago, so before the council's applications had even been looked at, he was telling people that there was no way the councils were going to get their way. So this was a predetermined decision by this government. Now, how can you do that? How can you put Great Wine and Tourism Associations, local people who wrote to their councils, councillors, mayors, CEOs, through all of this when you already know what the outcome is? So there's something actually really crook with this process. And I was talking to Peter Malinauskas on the way down here, and we'll get to work next week. We're back in Parliament where we can get around the table with the Labor team and work out what our next step is. But I think the next step is to really put the pressure on the Liberal Party as an entity. I think we need a good, strong candidate to run against this bloke, because the people of Finniss have been taken for granted year after year after year after year by people who just vote Liberal because they've always had a Liberal person here. What if we got a farmer, a regenerative farmer, a no GM farmer, to run against David Basham? And let's see what the people want, because we already know what the people of Finniss want. They want this area to remain GM free. So that's where you put the pressure on. I tell you, my phone has been running off the hook since Tuesday morning with winemakers and winery owners who are donors to the Liberal Party. They're the ones who donate wine for their functions. They're the ones who take the candidate around. You know, they've run against me 4 times. The last 3 elections, they've brought someone in who's not from around McLaren Vale, and still these McLaren Vale winemakers who like me, but their granddaddies and daddies always voted Liberal, so they're always going to, they take them around. Well, no more. These guys have had enough of their own party that they're sort of saying, well, we've made all these donations. We're in our 60s and 70s, and we've been donating to the Liberal Party for decades, and now they won't even listen to what we want, let alone what the wider community wants down here. So I think there's going to be a few Liberals quitting the party as members, and probably jumping on our side of politics, at least for me as an individual, because they've seen me take up the fight for the last 15 years against GM. They've seen me take up the fight against the Liberals' plan to dump PFAS from around Australia in McLaren Vale. So politics is changing. You know, people aren't as wedded to the Liberal Party or the Labor Party or whatever major party that their ancestors followed. They're actually realising that it's a democracy and they can shift their vote. And when they do shift their vote, they've got a lot more power. So I would encourage everyone here to go out, find someone who's a good, credible, hard-working candidate to run against David Basham in Finniss, and I reckon we'll have the same in a couple of Liberal-held seats in the Adelaide Hills. The really interesting one is the Barossa, where we've got an amazing bloke who's been in Parliament since 2006. He's Tony Piccolo, and his seat's always had Gawler and some of the northern suburbs. So they've flipped it like they flipped mine last election, and I picked up Kangaroo Island, Maiponga, Yankalilla, and that sort of western side of the Flurio. So they've flipped Tony's seat, and now he's going to be running as a sitting Labor MP against Stefan Knoll in the Barossa. And he's getting a lot of support out there from the people in the Barossa who want to remain GM free. So I think this can be an issue that really switches not just votes, but perhaps switches seats as well if we go about it the right way. So we have to be vigilant, we have to push the point, and we need to actually make Stephen Marshall and his cronies a little scared, a little afraid, because maybe then they'll listen to what the public of South Australia want. Because the public of South Australia, by and large, particularly in these areas that we've identified from Barossa down through the hills and all of the Fleurieu, don't want GM. So why wouldn't you just listen to them? There's no money in it for the government. It's just some ideological thing that they go, that they think that having GM canola, that tiny slither of revenue for our state, that tiny little part of a $21 billion food, wine and forestry industry, they think that it's more important to give those few people who might want to grow GM canola the right to do that at the expense of everyone else in that $21 billion part of the economy. So they need to listen. I mean, just have a look at what they did. And look, motor racing might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if you invest $10 million and get $45 million economic activity back, if you have an event like that that makes a lot of South Australians feel proud that we have the best car race, why wouldn't you listen to those people? Why wouldn't you listen to them on GM? Why wouldn't you listen to the people who don't want PFAS dumped in our soil and our waterways around McLaren Vale? This is a government that is tone deaf to what the people they're meant to represent actually want. And democracy, when you break it down, and this is what I've always said ever since I went into Parliament, is of the people, for the people. And, you know, politicians aren't the bosses who sit up here and you're all the loyal servants. This isn't England. I'm not the king or the queen or the prince or the princess. I'm the politician. I'm the guy that has to go in and do the work for the 25,000 people who elect me to be their representative. But I think some of these people think that I'm the premier, I'm the minister, I'll just do what I want. And these people can suck up whatever I give them. Well, it's time to rise up against these people and take them on in their own seats, because we've seen independents, MPs and candidates come up and have victories around Australia on issues that are important to local people. So again, let's get out, and I'm not going to prescribe who a candidate should be, and I don't necessarily think that a Labor Party person in the seat of Finniss might work, but a good, strong, independent candidate to give David Basham a run for his money might put a little bit of pressure on them. And when people are under pressure, they might actually start taking some notice, because at the moment they've ignored our emails, they've ignored our pleas in Parliament to do the right thing, they've ignored the will of the people, the will of the councils, the will of the producers that we have in South Australia to do what we want, not do what they want. So thank you so much for all the energy. I know there's people here as I look around who have been here for the long haul, even longer than the 15 years I've been involved. And I say thank you for all of that. Spread the word amongst your neighbours, amongst your friends and family, because this is such an important issue. And even if people aren't really hooked in on the debate of yes or no for GM, everyone's engaged when you start talking about the way these guys have trampled over democracy in the past week. So thanks again for all your support, and let's keep up the fight and not give up. Thank you.